In this video, I'm going to be focusing on the actual methods by which public opinion polls are conducted because I think it's important to understand that, and I think it's important for students and people in general to know how to interpret public opinion polls. But I want to start off with something that's not going to be on the exam. You're not going to need to include it into any of your essays, but I do think it's worth noting. Hopefully one of the things that you've picked up in my explanation of the memory-based model is the idea that what public opinion polls are really measuring is what is at the top of people's heads at the time the poll was conducted. Public opinion polls don't do a good job of estimating people's overall long-term opinions because how people respond to survey questions is based on what happens to be at the top of their head at the particular time that they're asked a question. Like in the previous example, the person who was listening to liberal talk radio or conservative talk radio, that completely shaped whether they approved or disapproved of the job the president was doing. But I want to talk about some other factors that affect the accessibility of information, the likelihood that it's going to be at the top of the head. First, the more frequently something is said, the more likely it's going to be at the top of your head. For example, you've heard me say over and over again, the memory-based model says that people take a random sample of attitudes, mostly from the top of the head, not so much from the back of the head, and based on that sample, they express an opinion. Well, part of the reason that I've said that over and over and over again is I know how the memory-based model works. And so I figure if I say it over and over again, frequently, more likely it's going to be at the top of your head when you take the exam. I've also stressed that you'll need to know that if you get a question on the exam about public opinion, and that's going to make it more important to you. And therefore, it's going to be more likely to be at the top of your head. Like I teach with the idea of the memory-based model. I try and prepare you based on the memory-based model. Now also, another thing that affects the accessibility of information is how recently you've heard the information. So if you were to watch my video on the memory-based model the night before your exam, it would be more likely to be at the top of your head because you would have heard it recently. And then finally, one last thing that I want to talk about because it was my area of research at UCLA. It turns out that information that's visual is more likely to be at the top of your head than information that's just text. And that's part of the reason that I use a lot of pictures in my lectures is in order to increase the likelihood that you're going to have images in your head because it turns out that images are easier to access from memory than text or words. And so that's why I present things the way I do. But also, politicians also know about the memory-based model. And that's why right before an election, right, you'll see the same commercials over and over again. As we get really close to an election, they'll happen very often so that they're recent in your head. And oftentimes these commercials include really dramatic imagery because when you go to vote, for some people, the way they express opinions is the same way that they're going to go ahead and vote. They're going to access from memory everything they know about the candidates in question, and if they haven't made up their mind, guess what they're going to do? They're going to take a random sample of attitudes, mostly from the top of the head, not so much from the back of the head, and based on that, they're going to cast their vote. That's if they haven't already decided if they're actually making their decision inside the polling station. And so one of the reasons that they use this very dramatic imagery is because they know that'll be drawn from memory more readily. So you'll see one of those scary commercials where they show a candidate and the candidate sort of his face morphs to Saddam Hussein and then Osama bin Laden and looks all scary and there's scary images in the background. That's what they're hoping for. They're hoping that if somebody just seen that commercial over and over again, saw the commercial right before they went into the polling station, right? And now they're getting ready to vote and they're like, isn't that the Osama bin Laden guy? That they're going to vote for somebody else. So none of that's going to be on the exam. You don't need to worry about that, but I just wanted to share that with you in part because my research and my dissertation focused on the impact that visual images have on people's political preferences. But now what I want to do is talk about the method by which public opinion polls are conducted. The first thing you need to know is that they use what's called probability sampling. For those of you who've taken statistics before, this is going to be like a refresher. A probability sample is any method of selecting people for a survey that selects people randomly and where everyone in the population being sampled has an equal chance of getting selected. And so this is how I explain it in my in-person classes. I ask them to tell me, is this a random sample? I'll say to them, okay, suppose I wanted a random sample of the students in the class, but I want to make sure it's random. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say on the count of 3, everybody get on your desks, jump up onto your desk. And the first 5 people who get on top of the desks, I'm going to assume that's my sample. Would that be a random sample? And I don't know who's going to be able to get up on top of the desk. I have no idea. Although that wouldn't be a random sample because the people who are likely to get on the top of the desk are going to be the most athletic people and maybe even the most athletic people who were paying attention to my instructions. That's not going to be a random sample. What if I decided instead, I look at the distribution of students and I notice I wanted to do a sample of 5. There's 5 people in the front row. And I say, okay, you know what? My random sample is just going to be the people in the front row. Would that be a random sample? No, it wouldn't. Hopefully that's what you said. Because people who sit in the front row might be different in some kind of systematic way than people who sit in the middle, and especially people who sit in the back. And so if my sample is just front row people, that's going to skew my results. That sample may not be representative of the rest of the class. What if I said, okay, everybody what if I put everybody's name on an index card, took out a paper bag, put all the names in the index card, stirred it around, and then picked out 5 names? Would that be a random sample? Would that be an example of probability sampling? Absolutely, right? Because now everybody has an equal chance of being selected. There's not going to be any bias in my sample. And so that's what probability sampling is. In public opinion polls, what they use when they're doing phone calls is they do what's called random digit dialing. What I mean by random digit dialing is they'll have somebody sitting in a computer. They know the areas that they want to call, so they already have the prefixes in there. But then what they do is they randomly generate the last 4 digits of your phone number. They're called the exchange. And the computer just does it. And whoever gets called up, they're the ones who get called up. Nobody knows ahead of time who's going to get called. But they try and make it so that it's going to be as random a sample as possible. But when people pick up the phone, they don't automatically talk to whomever picks up the phone. Well, why would that be? Why would they care? Because who picks up the phone when it rings inside a house isn't random either. Now, when I asked this student this question in class, Sometimes the responses of students vary. But in general, the way it works is that the people most likely to pick up the phone tend to be younger people, right? They're gonna be more likely to answer the phone, and we're assuming if there's a landline. Or moms. Moms are more likely than dads to pick up the phone. And so you can't just have it be that whoever picks up the phone, you interview them. So what they'll do is when they make their phone call, different protocols appear, and it'll say something like, I'd like to speak to the person who's over 18 years old whose birthday happened most recently. Or I would like to speak to the person whose birthday is coming up the soonest. Or I'd like to speak to the oldest female or the youngest male. And the protocols just change randomly because not only do they have to generate the numbers randomly, but they also have to make sure that the people that they select within the household that they called, they're selected randomly as well. And this is how serious they take the random sampling process. Now, in the next video, I'm going to talk about probability sampling a little bit more because oftentimes students are suspicious that random sampling even works, that this is a reliable way of doing things. And one of the things that you're going to find out is that you use random sampling in your life all the time. We all do. And we use it because it's effective. And I'll explain that in the next video.